Is up? Welcome back to Laura Likes Books. I'm Laura and I like books. You may or may not have noticed that I did not post a video in June, and the reason for that is I was in a huge reading slump. So for June, I only read 3 books, and I'm not saying that as like a judgment on myself, because that's still quite a bit. Reading 1 book a month is amazing. Reading a book a year, reading a book ever, is great. But for me, that's just not what I typically read, and I didn't want to make a video that I knew would only be like, 2 or 3 minutes long. So I decided to combine June and July into one video, which is this. I think I'll probably stick to my usual, like, save the best for last type situation. Even though I was in kind of a reading slump, I didn't have any bad reads. I think the lowest rating I gave was 3.5. So yeah, it looks like I had 3 3.5 star, 5 4 stars, 1 4.5 star, and 5 5 stars. So overall, like, really, really good. I know it sounds weird to say, but I almost still feel like I'm in a slump, even though I've read like 14 books over the last 2 months. I don't know, I'm just like, I guess I'm just waiting for that one book to like blow my mind. And I mean, I definitely had some good ones. I'm rambling, I'm sorry. Okay, let's move on. It's been 2 months since I've read some of these books, and especially the ones that I didn't rate as highly. I barely remember the plot, and especially not the character names, so just bear with me on that. The first book I want to talk about is called The Long Weekend by Jilly McMillan. Actually, in this one we have 3 couples who are very close. They take vacations together pretty much every year, and one of the ladies who usually goes on these trips, her husband has just passed away recently, so she decides not to go, but the other couples decide that they're still gonna go. So we have Jane, Ruth, and Emily, I believe. She's like the newest addition to their group. And so the women go a little bit ahead. They go like the night before, and then the men are supposed to show up the next morning. And so when the ladies get to this barn or whatever, I think it's a barn they're staying at. It's like, an Airbnb, but it's like in the country, it's barn. But they get there and there is a note saying one of your husbands will die, I think. It basically implies that one of their husbands will die. So that's the setup. And then, the rest of the book is kind of them trying to figure out what's going on. Is it a hoax? Is it real? And it kind of jumps perspectives a little bit. It was fine. I gave it 3.5 stars, like I said, so it wasn't bad. It was just typical, very slow moving. I did like one of the perspectives in the book is from Edie. That's the woman who has just lost her husband. Her daughter, I think her name's Imogen. So Imogen's dad has just passed away, and some of the perspective is from Imogen, and I really enjoyed those chapters. But yeah, overall it was just your typical like slow burn mystery, and nothing, like, even now talking about it, I don't quite remember like the ending or anything. So yeah, it was okay. Next up we have Hex Hall by Rachel Hawkins. It is a young adult kind of fantasy book. It's very much like, I guess I would describe it as like Harry Potter meets Monster High, or maybe just more like Monster High in general. It's about this girl, Sophie, who is a witch, and she is she has some mishaps with her powers. And so her mom sends her to this school that's it's like a reform school basically for witches, werewolves, fairies. There's even a vampire there. So it's like all of these, they call them prodigium, and it's all these teenage prodigium at this reform school, and it's people who have been sent there because they misused their magic or something along those lines. And I am always hesitant to rate young adult or like teenager books because I'm obviously not the target audience for that. However, if I had to rate it, I would give it a 3.5 as well. So like I said, we have Sophie. She has misused her magic, like on accident, not on purpose, but she's misused her magic, or her magic went awry. And so she goes to this school. She immediately meets this boy who is like a warlock, I think. And then this group, there's like 3 other girls who go to this school who are also witches. I don't know if there's more witches or if those are the only ones, but irrelevant. But this little group of witches tries to get Sophie into their coven, and then she also has like a vampire roommate who is nobody, like, apparently in this world they're really like discriminatory against vampires for some reason. Everyone mistreats this girl. They all like suspect her of killing her last roommate, and so there's a bit of a mystery to it. And it held my interest, so you know, it was not bad. I just think I don't know why I keep picking up young adult, because it's clear that I have outgrown this genre, but I had that book sitting for a long time and I kind of wanted to get to it, and the cover was pretty. I'm always like a sucker for a good cover. But yeah, so it was like a fun read. I would definitely recommend it for younger people. I don't know why I'm like over explaining why I read this book. Hi, I'm Laura. I over-explain everything. And speaking of Rachel Hawkins, next book up is The Wife Upstairs, also by her, also 3.5 star. This was not young adult. No, it wasn't. It was regular adult. But this one is more of a mystery-ish. It's kind of, okay, so full disclosure, I still have not read Jane Eyre. However, I've heard that it's not a retelling of Jane Eyre, but it's like reminiscent of Jane Eyre or something like that. I can't attest to that because, again, I haven't read it. I'll get back to you when I've read it, but it is about this woman named Jane who is a dog walker in a really affluent neighborhood. She is not rich herself. She is actually very broke. And so she's kind of living vicariously through walking these rich people's dogs and stuff. And she ends up meeting this guy. He actually almost hits her with his car. Eddie, I think is his name. So Eddie and Jane, you know, start this fling. Eddie's wife, B, has just recently died, so he is sort of still grieving over the loss of his wife. She also had a best friend named Blanche. Neither of them, their bodies were ever found. They had like a boating accident. Nobody really knows what happened. And so Jane is sort of haunted by the ghost of this wife. That's all you really need to know. She's like, you know, trying to have this fancy life with this guy who's rich, and, you know, she thinks that she's finally, you know, caught a break, essentially. She has like a kind of troubled past, and there's just a lot of general sketchiness going on. I think the humor is actually what stood out to me more so than anything else. But yeah, 3.5, middle of the road. Next up, we have Pizza Girl by Jean Kyung Fraser. This was the first book that I read in June, so I don't remember a ton, but I'll do my best. So I gave it 4 stars, and I remember enjoying it, but now that I'm sitting here, like, I'm drawing a blank on what I enjoyed so much. I think I just related to this main character so much. We have like an unnamed narrator. She is an 18-year-old girl who is pregnant. I had my son when I was 18, so off the bat, just I relate to that. Although it's very different because even though I was scared, I was happy to be pregnant. I wanted a baby. I was excited. This girl is not excited to be pregnant. And there's complexity there. It's, you know, she just lost her father. Her mom and her boyfriend are just like smothering the shit out of her constantly, and she just doesn't really have any idea of what she wants to do. And so she works at this pizza place, and when the story opens, and sorry, I'm like all over the place today. I'm trying to keep it cohesive. But she works at this pizza place, and this woman calls and orders a pizza. She's just moved into the area. She's like freaking out because her son is like, you know, not happy, and she asks if she can get a pizza with pickles on it. And so the girl like does it for her. She just like goes to the store, gets a jar of pickles, puts them on the pizza, takes it to her, and so she and the woman, I think her name is Jenny, they strike up a friendship, and over the course of the book, the girl becomes like obsessed with her, and it's really sad actually. Like parts, it is funny. And yeah, it's kind of, I guess I would describe it as like a coming of age story a little bit. But yeah, so she's dealing with the grief of losing her dad, but like she didn't have that great of a relationship with her dad. So there's like some messiness with that. She doesn't know how she feels about where her life is headed, or her boyfriend, you know, the father of her child. And so she's just very confused. There was one part, I'm sure I won't be able to find it, but there was one quote in here that was basically saying, she was like, sometimes I like keep my shoe untied on purpose so that I can see how many people will, you know, like stop me and tell me that my shoe is untied. And I'm never satisfied, because if somebody doesn't stop me, then I think like, what an asshole, like they're just gonna let me trip. But if somebody does stop me, then I'm like, mind your own business. And I don't know what it says about me, but that is exactly me. Like I would do something like that. All right, next up we have Someone's Listening by Serafina Nova Glass. In May I read On a Quiet Street, gave it 5 stars, so I thought I'd pick up another one of her books. And this one was really good. I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't quite as good, but it was, it definitely like kept me interested the whole time. We basically have this woman, Faith. She is a therapist who has like a radio show, I think. Yeah, she's like a radio host, but it's called, her show is called Someone's Listening. So the people call in, and then she kind of gives them advice on the air. And her husband goes missing after a party. I don't want to spoil anything, but she starts to receive letters that are like quotes from her book. And so she starts to feel like maybe her husband's disappearance wasn't an accident. But yeah, so once she starts to get these letters, she starts to feel like, okay, somebody is targeting me. And yeah, it's basically just trying to figure out what is going on with that. I gave it 4 stars. Faith kind of annoyed me a little bit, just because of like, what am I trying to say? She was kind of a mess. And again, I get it, her husband's missing, but I don't like when the main character is like, I know we're doing this whole like unreliable narrator thing. This has been like a prominent trope since Gone Girl, probably before that, but Gone Girl I feel like really got it, you know, brought it to the forefront a little bit. And I don't mind an unreliable narrator, but like I do mind narrators that are just like so helpless. That's the word I'm looking for, helpless, and whiny, and like a mess. And like, you know, like if they would just stay sober, that they could figure shit out, but they like refuse. You know, that just like irks me a little bit. Or like narrators who won't take their medicine, you know, like why? I get it, it's like to drive the plot, but I don't know, maybe I'm just like reading too many of them, but I'm starting to get sick of the unreliable woman who like is off her meds and drinking. I don't know. This video is like literally just an hour of me rambling about nothing. Moving on. The next book up was another 4-star. It's His and Hers by Alice Feeney. You know I love Alice Feeney. Alice Feeney is one of my favorite authors. This one was good. I don't think it held up to the other two that I've read so far, which were Rock, Paper, Scissors and Sometimes I Lie. Those two were much better. Rock, Paper, Scissors still being my all-time favorite so far. I'm working through her stuff right now. But this one was still super entertaining. We have Anna, who is a TV reporter, journalist. She has been hosting the show that she works for while her coworker has been on maternity leave. And so the lady comes back who's been out, and Anna has to start being like a field reporter again. And she's pissed about that because it's like a step down basically. But she gets called to her old hometown. I think it was her hometown, or maybe she just lived there, but anyway, she goes back to where she used to live because there's been a murder of a woman. And so we get her perspective, and then the perspective of Jack, who is the detective in this town. So yeah, we're getting like back and forth, his chapter, her chapter, his chapter, her chapter. And that's pretty much all I can say. But it was very entertaining. I think this one I listened to on double speed, so it only took me like 4 hours or so. But I was like hooked the whole time. I enjoy a twist where you've been thinking something's going on the whole time, and then it turns out that it's not that. Or it's like the clues were there, but you just couldn't see them, you know? This is more like, there is a little bit of that, but it's more like just far-fetched after far-fetched. And so I think it's just like personal preference, but for me, that's why it wasn't quite as good. But I still gave it 4 stars, and I definitely highly recommend this one. Okay, so the next book we gotta talk about is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is a fantasy book, and I started this book in March, and I just finished it in June, like the end of June. However, I gave it 4 stars. That's not an indication that it wasn't good. It was good. I don't know why it took me so long to get through this book. I mean, it is really long. Like, I listened to it at work. Part of it is I didn't know about the double speed thing when I started listening to it. It's like a 17-hour book. Like, it's like a Harry Potter length audiobook. And it was good. It held my attention, but I just kept going away from it, going to something else, going back, going to something else. And then I finally got down to about 10 hours and put it on double speed, and then I finished it. Another thing I want to say before I get into like what it's about is I think I just don't know if I'm into fantasy anymore. Fantasy was the first genre that I really started loving as an adult. I have some of my Terry Goodkind books right here, which I no longer care for Terry Goodkind. I'll make a separate video where I go over like that whole issue. But fantasy used to be my jam, and lately I just don't know. Like, I just don't know if I like it anymore. The last fantasy book I think I read was Game of Thrones, which I loved, but I don't know. I'm gonna keep trying. And I just started Priory of the Orange Tree yesterday, and I'm only like 2 chapters in, but it seems really like fast-paced. Yeah, I don't know like why it took me like 4 months. Yeah, like 4 months to get through this goddamn book, because it was good. Okay, so we have a boy. His name is Fitz, and he is think like Jon Snow, kind of, but like, he's a bastard, but like he, not really, like just mainly just in the sense that he's also a bastard. But he goes to live at like the castle. So in this world, this is part of what I think it is this book is all about world building, and that I get that it's like necessary. I'm gonna keep reading it because I think the next book will be more like about the story. This one was just a lot of like explaining stuff. But in this world, people are named after like their attributes. So we have King Shrewd. He had 3 sons: Chivalry, Regal, and Verity. I think that's right. So Chivalry was Fitz's dad, but he died. And so they bring Fitz to the castle, and he basically lives with like the stable master. I don't know if that's the right term, but the dude who like takes care of all the animals. Hi, I'm Laura, and I don't know words. And he starts to like, people start to take an interest in him. He like, there's so much, and like you'd think with it being so long and so much I'd be able to remember anything, but I don't. I just know that he ends up training to be an assassin secretly. It's basically about his childhood in this castle, but like he does like all these different things. Like he has lessons in different things. But I think the one that's really going to come into play is his assassin's training. I mean, I would assume, because it's called Assassin's Apprentice, and that's literally what he's doing. But there's like treachery. Some of the royal family doesn't like him so much. And so, yeah, it's like a lot of politics and backstabbing and all of that. And like I said, I am interested in continuing the story. I just think this one was a little bit too much world building and not like enough happened. I mean, it spans over probably like 10 years, but it just not a lot happens action wise. I don't know. It's weird because I gave it 4 stars, but I don't like even really have an idea of like what it's about other than just like setting stuff up. And yeah, so I'm gonna keep reading. I'll keep you updated on my progress. All right, next up we have The Best of Friends by Lucinda Berry. This was my first Lucinda Berry. I'm gonna keep reading her. I've heard great things. But this one I gave 4 stars. It's a domestic. It's basically about these 3 women who have been best friends since they were children. We have Lindsay, Danny, and Kendra. They are all best friends, and they have multiple kids, but each of them has a son who are also best friends. So this was very confusing for me at first. I don't normally have trouble keeping up with like books with a lot of characters, but for some reason I could not remember which kid belonged to which woman, and I think also like their other kids' names thrown in was just like too much for me. And so I kept having to like write down like which son is which woman's again, like which lady has which son. So Lindsay's son is Jacob, Kendra's son is Sawyer, and Danny's son is Caleb. I think I got that right. And Caleb, Jacob, and Sawyer are best friends, like I said. And one night, a tragedy happened. One of them ends up in a coma, one ends up dead, and the other one like is verbally non-responsive. And so that's right away, like chapter 1. And so these women who have been best friends for their whole lives, they kind of start trying to piece together like what happened, what caused this. And so as per, usual with these books, secrets start coming out, things aren't what they seem, things get revealed. And, we find out like what led to this. And then, like I said, they also have other kids who are still alive and well that they're having to so they're grieving, especially the mom with you know, the son who died, she's trying, you know, she's inconsolable, obviously. She's grieving. She pretty much can't get out of bed. She just spends all her time in her son's room. And then the one who's in a coma, you know, his mom is just like, never leaves the hospital. And so it was like very kind of gut-wrenching in that way. I would recommend it for anyone who likes domestic type dramas or thrillers. It wasn't really a thriller, but like domestic mystery or anything. It's a very like Desperate Housewives, you know, that kind of vibe, if that's what you're into. All right, next up, we have my 1 4.5-star book, and that was The Woman in the Library by Solari Gentile. This book, this book is weird. It's kind of meta, like it's a book within a book within a book, which I love. So basically what we have, I'll try to explain this. We have a group of friends, well, acquaintances, in a library that have just met, and they hear a scream, and so they try to figure out what happened. And so that is the story being written by Hannah. Hannah is then sending chapters one by one to this dude. Hannah is in Australia, and the guy that she's writing to like read her chapters for her is in Boston, and the like story with the library takes place in Boston. So he is kind of like sending her advice on everything from like locations to what, you know, what kind of phrasing people would use and all of that stuff. And so we're getting like back and forth between them of him like critiquing her chapters and then her actual story, which is the library scream thing. And then I think one of the characters in the story is also an author. So it was really interesting. The actual mystery part was, you know, it wasn't a locked room mystery. It was almost like the opposite, because they're in a locked room, not a locked room. They're in a room. The scream happens elsewhere. But early in the first chapter, it is implied that the murderer is in the room. So it's almost like the opposite of, you get what I'm saying. That was like very Agatha Christie, very like fun. But to me, what really did it was the correspondence between Hannah and Leo, which is the guy reading her chapters. That's all I'm gonna say. But I would highly recommend it. I am also a sucker for any books involving libraries or books involving other books. I'm here for that. You guys, I've done it. I have officially read a classic. I read 1984 by George Orwell, which surprisingly I had never read. For anyone who doesn't know what 1984 is, it is a dystopian, futuristic story that was written in 1949. It is eerily similar to our society even now, I would say. There are obvious differences, but some of the points are pretty spot on, honestly. It's a little bit scary. It follows this man, Winston. We have thought police, which are literal, like you can get arrested for having thoughts that aren't pure. You can get tortured and arrested and killed for, well, I mean, literally anything, but mostly it has to do with unwanted thoughts. Big Brother is like, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Big Brother. It is essentially the eye of the government watching constantly. And so it's kind of frightening. I mean, in the first chapter, we have Winston like sitting down for a drink at home, and he has to be careful because there are cameras everywhere. And so if he sits in a certain part of his living room, the camera can't see him. But they know what he's thinking. They can just look into anyone's thoughts at any time. It was depressing. On one hand, it made me happy that things aren't as bad as he envisioned. But on the other hand, it definitely made me feel like a little bit pessimistic at the same time. I think the thing that stood out to me the most was he was talking about the truth being subjective. Europe was at war and had like an ally, and then they literally just were like, no, now Europe's has this ally and is fighting this country, and it's always been this way. And so if anyone would try to question, like, no, like, just yesterday we were fighting these people, that person would like get arrested. And so they were constantly changing like the history books and updating everything so that it could never be discerned what the real truth was. And the truth was whatever the people in power, claimed it to be. And anyone who went against that was, any number of things could happen to them, none of them good. 5 stars. I don't know if I mentioned that. This was definitely 5 stars. The next book up is Toxic Positivity. Like, who am I? I read a nonfiction book. I actually love nonfiction, but I don't read them very often. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Oh, it's by Whitney Goodman, by the way, and I gave it 5 stars. Nonfiction, I tend to give 5 stars like pretty much to every nonfiction because I don't feel right rating, like, I feel like nonfiction books, even if they're not for me, they will help someone, unless it's like just like objectively false information, then I wouldn't give that 5 stars. But if it's like some kind of self-help thing, I know somebody will be helped by it. So I'm weird about like rating them, but I did really enjoy this. I think someone who is new to this topic would have enjoyed it even more. A lot of it was stuff that I already think about and already feel. So in that respect, it wasn't anything like super new, but I still enjoyed it. And basically what toxic positivity is when people, like in our culture, it is ingrained in us from an early age to look on the bright side of things. One of the examples that she gives right off the bat is about, she says, imagine that you just lost your job and you are trying to tell a friend about it, and your friend says like, oh, well, at least now you have time to do this, or, oh, well, you're lucky this didn't happen. Like something to try to make you see the bright side. And it's well-intentioned. It's not that anybody's trying to maliciously like do anything. It's just that we are uncomfortable. We've been taught to be uncomfortable with what we deem negative emotions. And our way of dealing with that is to try to like get out of here with that negativity. And we push that onto other people because we're uncomfortable with them having emotions around us, the emotions that we're uncomfortable having. And so whenever that person just needs like a space to vent, we end up unintentionally making it worse by, telling them to be positive. Essentially, what it's saying, and what I agree with, is that our negative emotions are just as important, if not more important, than our positive ones. And you have to feel that stuff. You can't just push it away, because what ends up happening, like in that scenario with the job, is that person is still upset because they lost their job. And then they feel guilty for feeling upset, which makes them feel worse. And then they feel like they can't talk to that person anymore because they tried to reach out and now they feel guilty and like shit. And yeah, so, it's not like anyone is intending to. I truly don't think most people even notice that they're doing it. It's just so in our brains to like, no negative vibes, like that whole thing is just so pushed on us constantly. You're like deemed weak and there's actually, she talks about some studies by Darwin about how like, if you can't handle your emotions, you're weak. Look at the way boys are raised. Luckily not my boy, because he has me as a mom, but you know, boys are generally raised to not cry and not feel, and you know, their emotions are suppressed. She basically talks about like ways in which toxic positivity affects our lives, some options for things we can say instead of, you know, look on the bright side type mantras, and how to be loving to ourselves and realize that we're not perfect and we're gonna mess up. And yeah, I think I've rambled on long enough about this, but I do highly recommend it. And it definitely made me feel better. Like I said, I knew a lot of the stuff in here, but at the same time, it's nice to get that like confirmation that you're not doing anything wrong by like not being upbeat. You know, like I've always strived to be like a positive person, right? I think most people do, but I've had to accept the fact that I'm just not that way. That doesn't mean I'm not happy, you know, but I'm just more of a realistic person, I guess. I don't know. I'm not one of those people that, and I have friends who genuinely are positive and like they're not pretending and they're not doing it in a toxic way. And there's nothing wrong with that if that is who you are. But for me personally, like I'm not going to force positivity onto myself and others, because that's not natural and that's not me. And so anyway, what I'm saying is this book kind of helped me like accept that about myself and feel better about the fact that I'm not, you know, positive all the time. And like, I do have a whole range of other emotions that are equally accepted. All right, next up we have The Family Next Door by Sally Hepworth. This book I gave 5 stars. I gave it 4 originally, and then I changed it because I kept thinking about it. This is another kind of domestic-ish mystery, I guess. We have this woman, Essie, who has a daughter. When her daughter was younger, I think like a couple years before this, when the book starts, she had postpartum depression really bad, and she accidentally left her daughter in her stroller in a park. She ends up going back, and luckily the baby's still there, and you know, they move past it. Essie has some fears because she's pregnant again, and now she's having fears that she's like not a good mom and stuff. There's also a couple other neighbors. We have Ange and Fran, I think. And then this other woman, they all have families. And then this other woman, Isabel, moves in next door to Essie, and she's single, not married, doesn't have kids. Basically, that's what the book is about, is like being nosy about Isabel and like, why is she there and why doesn't she have a family and blah, blah, blah. It's your typical like neighborhood drama. But the reason I love this one so much is because of that kind of twist where like you are just totally like thrown off. At least I did not see it coming. I thought the way it was set up was leading one way, and then it just completely blindsided me. Like, it's not like, I mean, I've seen twists like similar. It's not like the most original thing, but I don't know. I loved the writing. I loved the characters. I felt like for a mystery, it was like went pretty deep as far as like issues and the characters. But yeah, like, I don't want to spoil anything, but I will just say that Isabel is not there on accident. That's all I'm gonna say. All right, we got us a sci-fi. I was like all over the place these past couple months. This is The Paradox Hotel by Rob Hart. 5 stars. I might have mentioned this before. I literally don't know why I always think I don't like sci-fi. I love sci-fi. Every time I read a sci-fi, I end up giving it like 4 or 5 stars. I don't know why I convince myself I don't like it. This book was so good. I've seen mixed reviews, but I loved it. In this one, we have a woman named January. There's this Paradox Hotel, which is where January works. She's like the head of security. It's a very like found family, which I love. There's a whole cast of characters that work there. And this hotel is here for people there are flights that take you to the past. They can't go to the future, but they can go to the past. So rich people will come and they will take flights to like ancient Egypt or, you know, whatever. So they stay in the hotel, and it's like that's where they stay while they're waiting. So all of these bigwigs show up to like start bidding on this hotel because all the rich assholes like want to buy it to do whatever with it. And some weird stuff starts happening, like there's like a corpse in one of the rooms that only January can see. The clocks start like acting crazy. And basically the book is just spent like them trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And as far as like the mystery of it, it wasn't my favorite part. But it was just like the characters were I loved them. Like I loved them all. And that's why I gave it 5 stars. All right, last but definitely not least, my favorite book that I've read for June and July was The Push by Ashley Audrain. This is another one that had super mixed reviews. I've seen some people hate it, some people love it. I'm obviously in the loving it category. This book was so freaking good. We have a woman named Blythe, and she had a husband named Fox and a daughter named Violet. And then she also had a son named Sam. And this book, it was definitely like a thriller-ish, but it also involved a lot of like trauma from Blythe's past. Like some of the chapters were about Blythe's grandmother, and like what she endured, and then Blythe's mother, Cecilia, and like what she went through, and then how that affected the way she treated Blythe. It's a whole like generational trauma situation. And so because of that, Blythe ends up having Violet kind of for her husband. So she was super nervous, and then when she has Violet, she just immediately doesn't connect with her, and doesn't feel, it's like all these women have been giving her advice about like what she'll feel when she gives birth and how she'll feel about her baby, and she doesn't feel any of that. And in fact, she feels like something might be wrong with this baby. And so it follows, like I said, it shows stories from, you know, Blythe's mom, Blythe's grandma, and it's also written like second person. So like the whole thing, she is writing to Fox, her husband. And so she's like, you know, you and I decided this, and I told you this on this day, which I feel like really added a lot to the story. And so she is kind of like cataloging like, this event happened and this is why I felt like Violet, something was wrong with her, and you didn't understand, and your mom didn't understand because she was perfect. And so anyway, she ends up having her son, who she immediately feels a connection with, like instantaneous, which, you know, makes her feel like a terrible mom to Violet, and it's a whole thing. But what I really loved about this book, and there's so much more. It's just like, I can't spoil anything, but it is so freaking good. And the whole time you're just wondering, like, is this response that she's having to her daughter, is this based on her past? Is this based on her, like, she's just not reliable? Is this kid actually evil? And so the whole time you're just kind of wondering, like, what the hell is going on? But what I really loved about it was, I feel like it kind of points out like how our society treats women who are not maternal. Like me personally, even though I worried that I wouldn't be a good mom before I had Jaden, you know, the second that I was pregnant, I felt that maternal instinct. I felt a bond with him. I'd never felt even though I had postpartum depression and was worried about my mothering skills, I always felt a connection to my son, and I never worried about that. But so basically what I'm trying to say is that I think I am highly maternal. However, there are many women who aren't. And I think that women who are not maternal get such a bad rap in our society, because, you know, it's just expected of a woman to be a mom. And if you aren't a mom or don't want to be a mom or can't be a mom, it's, you know, like frowned upon in some weird way. And I mean, especially like in this case, and it's fiction, obviously, but it's like, it's not that Blythe knew she didn't want kids and had them anyway and wasn't maternal. It's like, she didn't know. I mean, there's got to be women who genuinely think they do want kids, and then they just have that kid and that connection isn't there. Anyway, it just really got me thinking about our view, collectively, our view about women who are not maternal. Anyway, I feel like I've gone off on like 14 different political tangents today. So I'm gonna wrap it up there. But yeah, last thing I'm gonna say about The Push is please read it. It is so good. Yeah, that's gonna do it. That's all, I think 14 books that I read in June and July. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.